Womp womp. It is the day that Wizards fixes all constructed formats. They're going to fix standard, they're going to fix modern, they're going to fix pauper, they're going to fix legacy. I don't know if anyone plays Pioneer, but maybe they'll fix Pioneer. It's definitely the day. It's ban day, it's ban breach day. This is the day that everyone's been looking forward to. So we have no standard changes. Seems odd to not have made any standard changes. They'll have their explanation and their breakdown of what their thought process was. So it seems like there was a lot of conversations and a lot of people talking about things, that seems strong enough and good enough to get banned. Like, this town ain't big enough. Kind of felt like one of those cards or one of those things like that. Maybe Monstrous Rage, maybe even Beans, but those three cards are kind of the dominators of the metagame. The top three decks, Mice, Pixie, and Domain, have just been kind of the big, the big three and kind of the big boogeymen. I was hoping that they would ban this town just because of the play patterns that it does, of just like make you discard a bunch of cards, sacrifice all your creatures, you never have anything in play, and then they just like slowly beat you down with a 2/2. Doesn't seem healthy, doesn't seem super good. Monstrous Rage, obviously, was hoping maybe to see something there, just because it invalidates all the blocking. There's turns where, you're getting run over by, your Mice on like turn 3, and there's no real coming back. Then it's just, hope they don't top deck Lightning Strike, hope they don't top deck like Burst Lightning as you try and recover and bounce back. So it seemed like those two could have been good. Beans, as a Zur main, gamer here, I wouldn't have wanted to see Beans get banned, but I would have understand. It is a very strong card. It seems like once the Beans resolves, it's kind of game over. Because if you like bounce it, recast it, get a card draw anyways, you have to destroy it and go from there. But it's just, it's odd that there's no changes in standard. Pioneer, I don't know anything about Pioneer. It's not my format. I'm only going to play it, and I'll probably just play Control when it's RTQ season anyways. So I don't know what the implications of this are. The Underworld Breach, just only Breach being banned, looking at Modern here, it's a little... I think it's a little too much of maybe a cop out, or it's too light-handed. Underworld Breach is very good. Breach is the top deck in the modern metagame right now. Followed by Boros and Eldrazi Ramp. So the thing to consider, one thing I would have seen, or I think two things I would have liked to have seen. One would have been like Myco Spawn. I think they should have banned something out of Eldrazi. I think it's going to put Eldrazi into a position where it's just incredibly strong, especially with this new Ugin coming out. I think Eldrazi is going to be like a tier 0.5, or even potentially like a tier 0 deck, just because you've only got 4 consigns if you're running blue. If you're not running blue, I don't break the ice. You could run those. You could maybe run like Crumble to Dust in red, but really your hope is that you can outrace them before they like you basically have to be aggro. You run energy, burn, any like things like that can hopefully reduce their life total to 0 before they can cause you to sack all your colored permanents, running all his dust, or exile your lands over and over again. I think Michael Spawn just being able to kick it by turn 3, turn 4 just seems very like toxic. It's one of those things where if you're worried about if you're playing against a blue deck and you're worried about consigns, you just go and kick your Myco. You don't even have to kick it. You just play your Myco Spawn. You go get your Cavern. Now, sure, they can stifle they can consign the cast triggers of all of your stuff, but you still have just whatever the beater is, and now they have to have a removal spell, which, like, a Writhing Chrysalis is really hard to get rid of once you start sacking spawns. Devour being a 6/6 is hard to deal with. There's just so many. It's just the way that the deck plays just feels very gross in terms of just the play patterns that you kind of get exposed to, and the things that you have to fight around. Because if you're not worried about blue and consigns and stuff like that, then you go get your Sanctum, so you can go get your Cyrus of In-Depths, you can go get your Emrakul's, you can do all of that stuff that really just it makes it for another one of those just like they kill you quickly because they take your turn and they play the Emrakul's and they have all these big things, but it's just not, it's not fun to have someone go like, Michael Spawn, eat your land, Michael Spawn, eat your land. It basically just turns games into a lot of non-games where maybe you kept a 3-lander and then some card draw or ways to find lands or something. And they just like eat 1 or 2 of your lands, and it's like, well, now I have no mana, I have no way to cast my spells. So I think, Michael Spawn probably should have seen something. I mean, they did it right in Legacy, but I think Michael Spawn should have been something that they banned in Modern as well. But let's look at their rationale. So Standard is flourishing, no changes to the format with this announcement. Our approach is updates. So we're committed to leaving the format as untouched as possible with only once a year before rotation. So maybe that's another reason that they didn't want to ban Beans is Edge of Eternity's launches in a few months anyways. So, they'll do the typical, like, if something's a problem, let it continue to be a problem for like 3 more months, and then we'll look at it after ban or after rotation. Just that kind of attitude that they've done in the past, where they let something be like Breach, they let something be a problem for far too long and don't do any emergency bans, and then they just say, all right, well, cool, let's just now we'll hit our bans after all the players have suffered for long enough. But I don't think Standard is a format where like people are really suffering. I think there's ways to beat like Beanstalk. There's ways to beat Zur. All of these like Ketramos, like Abzan, Orzhov, like exile based removal decks. Things they're running like The End. They're running Deadly Cover Up. They've got all of these cards. I think those are starting to really pop up. They're starting to really fight the domain menace that is in Standard right now, as well as Blue White Control has a really good matchup. So there seems to be a lot of the meta is really adjusting well. And it's nice that like the top 3 decks, so Standards on display, Pro Tour, Aether Drift was showcased, rich and diverse metagame, the 3 best decks in Standard, Gruul Mice, Esper Pixie, and Domain being the most popular strategies. Despite this definition at the top, this is only 50% of the field. The other half was wide open. There's a chance for success with almost any type of deck imaginable. Domain Overlords ended up taking the Pro Tour and looked dominant all weekend, but since then its win rate has slowly declined. So that's just, the deck's running a lot of sideboard pieces or more cards and more decks being built to kind of combat stuff like that. So the one thing that is pretty cool about the top 3 decks is they kind of like rock, paper, scissors each other. Like Gruul Mice beats Domain, Domain beats Pixie, and I think Pixie has a pretty good matchup against Gruul. So like it's one of those things where like the 3 decks are, it's not like 2 of them are really good against one, and there's like a weird dynamic there where they each have a good matchup against one of the other 2 top decks. I think that's a really cool thing about Standard. So one of the most exciting aspects of the Standard format is the degree in which it continues to evolve. Even between set releases, the self-bound strategy featuring Nurturing Pixie and This Town Ain't Big Enough are a well-known pillar of Standard now, but weren't popular until a month after Foundations, despite the fact that the shell of this deck existed in the format ever since the release of Duskmourn. So it makes sense. I get what they're saying. I don't know if I fully agree with not banning any. I guess I don't know. Banning something in Standard is usually, it's not the route I think you typically want to go. I don't think anything is like as dominant, prevalent, as like oppressive as some of the things that have been banned in the past. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not upset about it because I'm a Zur gamer, so I'm gonna be happy to be able to still play Domain, still be able to do the Zur thing, and just kind of jam out that way. So, and we'll see with Dragonstorm and Final Fantasy what happens. How things change. Maybe, they'll have to look at bans for something because, some of these new sets make something really, really bad, really broken. But I get it. I'm just a little biased in that I don't really like playing against Pixie or, the Esper Bounce deck, just because it's, they can, if they have like a good opener, it seems almost impossible to win. But either way, it's still not bad. So Pioneer, no changes. Not really going to read anything through there. So now to Modern. Underworld Breach is banned. So to echo a point from the opening of the article, December's updates to the ban list did a lot to breathe new life in the format. We've seen Mox Opal, Green Suns, and Faithless Looting show up in a bunch of decks to varying degrees of satisfaction. From the team here at Wizards, Green Sun showing up in Yawgmoth and Amulet Titan was something anticipated and we're happy about. Faithless Looting breathing new life into proactive graveyard-centric decks like Hollow One is also great. However, Opal teaming up with Underworld Breach creates an explosive and resilient combo deck that is not something we're happy with. So just, as people know, Grinding Station, Breach, plus like a Mox Opal is infinite mill on yourself, or mill your whole deck, make infinite mana, and win with Grape Shot, win with Thassa's Oracle, win with Jace, all of those. So to give a bit more context to the last couple months, we've seen a lot of experimentation in different ways to play with the new tools in the format, but over time, it's become increasingly apparent that the strongest thing to do is Temur Grinding Breach combo deck. The deck utilizes the combination of Underworld Breach and Grinding Station in conjunction with 0-mana artifacts to mill, and then win with Thassa's Oracle or Grape Shot. It's notoriously resistant to graveyard and artifact hate by virtue of its ability to diversify its threats, which make it uniquely difficult to overcome in sideboarding. Between the resiliency and its explosiveness, with this being a deck that can win as early as turn 1, we're confident that it's time to send Breach back to the Underworld. With the amount of pressure that Breach put on the format, we expect the format change a good bit with its departure, especially sideboards. Previously, we saw players committing well over half their sideboards to try and suppress the combo. But now we're optimistic that the format can open up a bit and allow for a wider range of strategies to exist. Looking past Temur Grinding Breach, Modern looks pretty good. A bunch of different decks are showing up, with Orzhov Blink making a name for itself over the last few weeks. Aether Drift has had a major impact on the format, with Ketramos making its way into the aforementioned Blink deck, Marauding Mako showing up in Hollow 1, and Stock Up showing up in blue decks that are looking to play longer games. We're planning to keep an eye on the decks that were strong enough to hang despite Temur Grinding Breach prevalence: Boros Energy, Oculus, Eldrazi variants, Titan, and Orzhov. So we're watching Red-White Energy variants the closest to see if reasonable counterplay emerges in the coming RCQ qualifier season, and we're excited to see what players cook up. So I like the ban of having Grinding Breach gone, or trying to remove it from the format as easily as you can. The thing that's really the thing that they brought up, and I would agree with, is just having to commit so many pieces to your sideboard. Looking at top 8 or top 32 challenges, looking at 5-0s, a lot of the sideboards are like 8-9 cards of ways to stop Breach that are kind of good against other stuff, but not like super great. And even seeing all of those pieces and still losing. Like I've played games of MTGO where I had 4 different pieces of hate, and in like 2 turns they had just dismantled all of it and proceeded to win. So I understand that. It makes a lot of sense. I'm happy to see Breach gone. I was kind of hoping it would be Grinding Station, just because there's some really cool stuff that you can do with Breach in like maybe Ruby Storm, or that you can do with Breach in like Prowess, things like that. But I understand that Breach was just kind of one of those cards where it shouldn't have been printed, and it just made things a little bit too powerful and too strong in terms of just the broken things you can do. I mean, like Prowess, the goal of Prowess is to go fast, burn you out quickly, and then just, hope that they've killed you in time. Running something like Breach lets them either use their baubles multiple times so that they can draw a bunch of cards, refill their hand, and stuff like that. So it makes sense. Like I said, the thing I wish that they would have done would have been maybe something out of like Eldrazi. Ban the Myco Spawn, ban Malevolent Rumble maybe, ban Kozilek's Command. Just any of those, like those 3 cards are I think, especially with new Ugin coming in, we're gonna be looking at some really oppressive, kind of really hateful Eldrazi decks. So new Ugin, when you cast a spell, exile up to 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, exile up to 1 target permanent that's 1 or more colors. +1, gain 3 life, draw a card. 0, add 3 colorless. 11, search your library for any number of colorless non-land cards, exile them until end of turn. You may cast those without paying their mana cost. So this is going to be one of those cards where it's not hard for this deck to get to 7 mana and cast this. So the really gross play, or the way that this is going to end up working out is, they go like a Myco Spawn maybe on turn 2, turn 3, get their whatever land they need to get up to 7. they cast this thing. Maybe they have some floating mana from some of their other spells, or from their lands. Cast something else colorless, or even if they don't, they just zero it, get three colorless, and then just proceed to cast like a talisman, and then proceed and then exile something. So the turn it comes into play, realistically they're losing. You're losing 2 permanents that are 1 or more colors. So it's just gonna, and it's a 7 mana planeswalker, so they hit your biggest, strongest thing that could potentially kill it. Like if you're running Oculus or Ketramos, things like that have a chance to deal with it. They just start exiling everything, and then at that point you just don't, you can't have you don't have a board state. You're pretty much screwed. So. Even being able to just like use the 0 ability to get 3 colorless and just go like Kozilek's Command on 1, like scry 1, draw and make a guy, like scries and guys is very good. And that's just two free removal spells just for taking game actions. It seems like this card, once it starts getting into the deck, it's going to really push the deck into kind of that like tier 0.5, like this card might cause something to get banned out of Eldrazi. And the other thing, I think it's the optics of it don't look great, where some of the strongest cards and the cards that potentially or should get banned out of this deck are Sowing Michael Spawn was an MH3 card, Kozilek's Command MH3, Malevolent Rumble MH3. Like a good portion of this and a good portion of like the 3-ofs, 4-ofs of this deck are from Modern Horizons 3, so maybe they didn't want things to just be like, well, we're just going to continue to ban things out of Modern Horizons 3 because we realized that we made a mistake. So I think those are my kind of initial thoughts and ponderings on this. I don't agree with not banning something out of Eldrazi. Again, especially with Ugin coming out, I think it's going to be just a very kind of miserable time to play Modern with Eldrazi. It because you can only have 4 consigns. You can only have a 4 of like Break the Ice or Land Hate in your sideboard, stuff like that. So your consigns get really, really stretched thin on what you can target, because now Ugin is a must counter. Now Emrakul's a must counter. You realistically want to counter the Sowing Michael Spawn because you don't want to keep losing your lands. You don't want them to get their land. So it's just like it's gonna put Eldrazi into a spot where it's one of the strongest decks. It might be the strongest deck, and it's just going to just maybe start dumpstering a little bit. I would love to be wrong, but I think with Breach now being gone, the next de facto best deck is Eldrazi, because you can answer energy pretty easily, and there's a lot of answers in a lot of different colors. Whereas Eldrazi, you need ways to counter the cast triggers. And the only thing that really does that is like consign for a good rate. You can counter the spell, like you can counter an Ajani and they don't get the cat and they don't get to do the Ajani thing in energy. You can counter their spells and not let them resolve, but with everything being a cast trigger off of Eldrazi, your consigns are basically the premium card that you just like hope to find. Which I don't think, it just doesn't feel great. It doesn't seem like it's going to be something that's very fun to play against, but I'm hoping that I'm wrong, and I'm hoping that Eldrazi isn't horrible, or that, for RCQ season or something, they do an emergency ban because they realize that they really screwed up with this new Ugin. But those are kind of my initial thoughts. Those are my ponderings and ravings about the new ban announcement. So I think it'll be interesting. I think Modern's going to get a lot more fun. I think there's probably enough counterplay in like the Orzhov Blink deck and stuff like that, where you can start running some more like hate cards for other types of decks instead of having to commit majority of your sideboard to Breach because it was just such a huge menace in the format. So I think it will. I think it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to open up a lot more creativity and things that you can do with your sideboards. White Orchid Phantoms, Break the Ice. Crumble to Dust might be a decent one. You can also run like Alpine Moons, Consign. So there's a lot of ways to fight it. I just think at some point, they might have to look at Eldrazi as just a something needs to go from it, and it's either Ugin or Mycospawn. So another thing that I think is kind of interesting is they didn't do any unbans. I know a lot of people were thinking about them doing unbans. Maybe they're going to unban Deathrite Shaman, maybe they're going to unban Jitte. I was kind of hoping maybe a Fury unban. I don't think, looking at the the top of the meta, especially like looking at the Eldrazi deck, you're losing, you're 2-for-1ing yourself to kill a Mycospawn, to try and kill the Chrysalis. Like there's, in Eldrazi, there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of things you're killing with a Fury. Boros Energy, I think it would be really interesting to have, Boros Energy with Fury, just because it's good in the deck and it's good against the deck. So I think that would make an interesting kind of game plan, game strategy. Because, the big argument against Fury was, oh, well, you can't have creature decks. You can't have X1s. Well, no X1 decks really started to pop back up. Like Elves isn't back. Elves never came back. Humans, there really isn't like any decks that that flourished and really popped back up because Fury was gone. So I think Fury would be a cool unban. I would love to have Ponder in Modern again. I wanna play Miracles, and Ponder is just a great card for that. So. It seemed, like I said, it felt like a cop-out. It felt like it was not like they just, they kind of just not pandered, but they kind of just listened to what people wanted and didn't do a lot of maybe background playtesting or something. I could be wrong about that, but it felt like one of those things where, they maybe could have tried to unban like Umezawa's Jitte. Like there's no real reason. Like Stoneforge isn't really a deck. There's not really a lot of decks that are going to be running Jitte and excited about it. And, I think that's probably one of the safest unbans. Again, Fury would have been really good. Ponder, I would have been a fan of. Deathrite Shaman, I think, would have maybe pushed the Orzhov Blink or the Orzhov midrange deck a little too far. Because just being able to like exile land, you're basically making a mana and drawing a card every time you activate the Shaman. The other thing you can do is, you can use the -2, so you're draining your opponent for casting instants and sorceries. So it's an interesting, it would have been interesting. I don't know if it would have been the best, but I think it would have been very good. And I think that's probably why they kind of shied away from it. But just, there was some specs and some conversations that people were having. And I think it's interesting they didn't do any unbans, but it could be that, it's only been 4 months since they unbanned Opal, since they unbanned Green Suns, Faithless Looting, Splinter Twins. So it might be just one of those, like they want to let things play out just a little bit longer and then look at, what they want to do for maybe a potential unban at the next ban announcement. So I think that is, kind of everything. Those are my thoughts, again, on all of this. So I think it's been a interesting day, a little bit of a letdown of a day, again, hoping for maybe 1 or 2 unbans to kind of reinvigorate or make some more exciting stuff, but that is not what we got. So those will be the endings of my rantings, my ravings, my thoughts and opinions. So thanks again for stopping by. Thanks for hanging out. Be sure to comment. Let me know what you guys think about the bans. Let me know if you agree with my thoughts, if you agree with the bans or not, and have a great day.